A child, alone, crying in the middle of a wildlife reserve. No parents in sight, just dust, silence, and danger. Then, from the tall grass, a lion emerges. Massive, majestic, deadly. His golden mane sways with the breeze as he locks eyes with the boy. And then, without warning, he roars. A deep, thunderous sound that rattles the morning air, and begins to charge straight at the child. What happened next would leave even the most experienced rangers speechless. The lion's name was Scout. He slowed as he approached the boy, circling him with heavy steps, his paws pressing deep into the dry earth. The boy, no older than 3, sat motionless, his hood pulled up over his head. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and his cries grew louder with every breath. Scout paced back and forth. Not out of hunger, but something else. Conflict, confusion, curiosity. He paused. His golden eyes locked onto the child. And then, he roared again, louder this time, more primal. The boy whimpered, frozen in fear. There was nowhere to run, no one around. Just the vast wilderness, and this powerful predator. But Scout wasn't just any lion. Years earlier, he had been found in this very reserve, lying beside the lifeless body of his mother. Poachers had struck under the cover of night. When rangers arrived at dawn, only one tiny cub had survived. Ethan, a young wildlife ranger, was the first to reach him. Scout was weak, barely moving, pressed tightly against his mother's body, as if hoping she might wake up. Ethan wrapped the cub in his jacket and took him home. He knew raising a lion was dangerous, unnatural, but letting him die wasn't an option. For weeks, Ethan fed him with a bottle, woke up at all hours of the night, kept him warm, safe, and alive. But he also knew Scout couldn't stay with humans forever. He belonged to the wild. When the time was right, Ethan introduced Scout to a lioness in the reserve. She had just given birth to her 3rd cub and was known for her gentleness despite her fierce instincts. To everyone's surprise, she accepted Scout, nurtured him as if he were her own. From that day forward, Scout learned the ways of the wild. He grew fast, powerful, fearless. As years passed, he broke away from the pride, as all male lions eventually do. He became a solitary lion, roaming vast territories, facing other males in brutal battles for dominance. But Ethan, he never stopped watching over him. Even as Scout grew into one of the most dominant males in the reserve, Ethan tracked his movements. Not just as a ranger, but as the man who once saved him. Scout was strong, undefeated in many fights. He ruled his corner of the reserve. Feared by rivals, respected by all. The reserve was home, but it was not without danger. Despite efforts to keep it secure, poachers had recently found weaknesses along the outer boundaries. Fences had been cut, warning signs ignored. No animals had been harmed yet. But the threat was real. Ethan and his team worked day and night to reinforce security. Still, it was through one of these compromised areas that Scout would encounter something no one expected. That morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills. The air was cool, perfect for hunting. Scout awoke in the tall grass, stretched his massive frame, and let out a low growl. His stomach ached. Time to find food. Lions like Scout had it harder than those in a pride. Hunting alone meant failure was more frequent, but he had survived this way for years. As he walked, something in the wind shifted. A strange scent. And then, a sound, carried faintly by the breeze. He paused. Listened. Crying. He followed it, cautiously. And there, on a lonely dirt road, sat a small boy, completely alone. Scout watched from the grass, licking his lips, not from hunger but instinct. He stepped forward, then stopped. Then forward again. The boy was sitting right in the middle of the road, unaware of the danger approaching him. Scout began to circle, slow, deliberate, never taking his eyes off the child. The boy sobbed louder, and something inside the lion began to shift. The fierce predator suddenly seemed unsure, torn. He paced, turned, circled again. And then, he stopped. A new scent drifted through the morning air. Scout paused, his ears twitched, and his muscles tensed. Something was wrong. He sniffed the breeze again. Then he saw him. The little boy, still sobbing in the dirt, cheeks red, eyes swollen from crying. Scout's body stiffened. He let out a terrifying roar. His fangs bared, eyes locked, but not on the child. The boy froze, silent from shock. He was staring at Scout, but Scout was staring past him. Then, without warning, the lion charged. The child flinched, expecting claws, teeth, the end. But instead, Scout soared over the boy's head, and landed with a heavy thud behind him. A sickening thump followed. The boy turned, heart pounding. Behind him lay another lion, larger than expected, but no match for Scout's fury. Scout was towering above the intruder, roaring with such force the ground trembled. He swiped his massive claws across the other lion's side. The two beasts clashed, a blur of roars, fur, and flying dust. The fight didn't last long. Scout was dominant, and driven by something more powerful than instinct. He wasn't fighting for food. He was fighting for the boy. Meanwhile, Ranger Ethan was speeding down a dirt road, unaware of the scene unfolding just ahead. He rounded a bend, and froze. Two lions, locked in a brutal fight. But then, just feet away from them, a child, sitting helpless on the ground. Ethan's heart dropped. How had a child gotten inside the reserve? And why hadn't the alarm been triggered? None of that mattered now. He slammed his foot on the gas, sending his jeep hurtling toward the scene. Just as the second lion broke free from Scout's weight and limped away into the bushes. Scout turned back. His gaze fell on the boy, and then on Ethan's speeding vehicle. Ethan's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He loved Scout like family. But if the lion had harmed the boy, even unintentionally, it would be catastrophic for the reserve. But what Scout did next nearly caused Ethan to crash the jeep. The lion lay down beside the child. Calm, alert, his huge body shielding the boy from any further threat. He scanned the area, ears twitching, eyes sharp. He was protecting him. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't a territorial battle. This wasn't about dominance or food. Scout had chosen to defend a human child. And then Ethan remembered. The day he found Scout. Curled up beside his mother's lifeless body. Soft whimpers, frightened eyes, the same helplessness. Had Scout seen something of himself in that crying child? Had he remembered the pain, the loneliness? Ethan didn't know. But he had to act. He turned off the engine and slowly opened the jeep door. Scout lifted his head and stared. Of all the rangers in the reserve, only Ethan had this kind of connection with the lion. They had a history, a bond born from rescue and trust. Scout didn't move, but he didn't growl either. Ethan stepped out, slow and steady. He approached the boy. Scout stood up, towering once more, but didn't advance. He looked Ethan over carefully, as if deciding whether to allow him near. Then, with one final glance, the lion turned and walked away. Ethan waited until Scout was at a safe distance, then gently lifted the child into his arms. The boy whimpered, his tiny hands gripping Ethan's shirt. Now that the lion was gone, the crying had returned. Ethan whispered calming words as he carried the child into the jeep. Driving slowly, he glanced back in the mirror. Scout stood far behind them, watching, guarding, like a silent protector of the wild. Back at the reserve office, Ethan was still shaken. What had just happened? Why had a child been left alone in such a dangerous place? He needed answers. He rushed to the security room and loaded the CCTV footage from the reserve boundaries. There, on the screen, was a battered old car pulling up just outside the fence. A young man in the driver's seat. Moments later, a woman stepped out, holding a small child in her arms. She looked around, anxiously, then spotted a gap in the fence. After a few failed attempts, she pushed through the broken section and placed the boy on the dirt road inside the reserve. Then, she left. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his heart aching. Who were these people? Why would someone abandon a child like this? And how had Scout known what to do? Ethan leaned closer to the CCTV screen, his heart heavy. He watched as the woman gently kissed the child on his forehead. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something deeper, something broken. She stepped back, climbed into the battered old car, and drove away, leaving the boy, all alone. The camera showed the child standing there, confused, looking around, searching for his parents. But they were already gone. Ethan sat in silence. His mind raced with questions. Why abandon a child in the middle of a wildlife reserve? Why not somewhere safer? But then, he remembered that kiss. It hadn't been careless, or cruel. It had been filled with love, as if the woman had no other choice. Maybe she thought a ranger would find him quickly. Maybe she knew about the security cameras. Maybe, just maybe, she believed someone out there would save him. Ethan knew he'd never get all the answers. But one thing was certain. That child had been left behind by someone who cared, and yet couldn't stay. Back at the ranger's office, Ethan made the boy something to eat. The child, finally calm, sat quietly, tiny hands wrapped around a spoon. It was the first real moment of peace since the chaos had begun. Ethan sat across from him, gently asking questions. But the boy said little. All Ethan could get was a name. David. That one word hit harder than he expected. It was time to contact the authorities. But as Ethan picked up the phone, he looked at the child again. There was something about him, something familiar. Years ago, Ethan had rescued a helpless lion cub who had lost his mother. And now, he had watched that same lion protect a helpless child. It was like the circle had completed itself. Scout had once needed Ethan. And now, David did too. The authorities arrived later that afternoon. By then, David was feeling better, watching videos on Ethan's phone and laughing softly. At one point, he pointed outside and mimicked a roar. "Lion," he said with a smile. Ethan chuckled, his heart warming at the sound. Still, the reality was setting in. When he asked the officers what would happen to David, the answer was clear. If no family came forward, he would be placed in an orphanage, hoping someone, someday, might adopt him. The thought weighed heavily on Ethan's mind. So, before he could second-guess himself, before logic could catch up with his heart, he spoke up. "I'll take care of him," he said softly. "I want to foster him while you search for his family." It was a bold offer. He wasn't a father. He never even considered raising a child. But looking at David, he knew he couldn't let him go. The officers agreed, but made no promises. And just a few days later, Ethan got the news he had feared. David's family couldn't be found. The boy would have to go to the orphanage, unless someone stepped forward. Ethan looked over at David. He was sitting on a bench just outside the ranger's cabin, laughing, watching butterflies dance in the tall grass. Just yesterday, Ethan had taken him for a drive through the reserve. David's eyes had lit up when he saw the lion cubs playing near the watering hole. His laughter had echoed across the open plain. It was the first time Ethan had seen the reserve through someone else's eyes. And it felt magical. He knew David would grow up one day. And he would have questions. About his past, about why he was left behind. Ethan would never have all the answers. But he could give him something even more important. He could tell him that his parents did love him. That a brave lion once protected him from danger. And that someone had chosen to stay. Ethan's decision was made. There would be no orphanage for David. He began the long process to adopt the boy. Paperwork, interviews, inspections. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every moment. Months later, everything was finally official. Father and son. To celebrate, Ethan took David for a drive through the reserve. The late evening sun bathed the landscape in a golden glow. As the jeep rolled slowly over the dirt road, they passed a familiar spot. The place where Ethan had once found a frightened child, and where a lion had stood guard. There, resting beneath a tree, was Scout. The mighty lion raised his head slowly. His gaze met Ethan's, then shifted to the small boy smiling through the window. For a moment, time stood still. One man. One lion. One child. All bound by something unspoken. Ethan smiled to himself. He couldn't wait to tell David the full story one day. About the lion who had once needed saving. And later, became a savior himself. Their life together might be unconventional. But to Ethan, it was perfect. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Ethan parked the jeep on a small ridge overlooking the reserve. David sat beside him, eyes wide, lips parted in awe. Scout lay in the distance, peaceful, strong, the guardian of this land. And in a way, the guardian of this boy too. Ethan rested a hand on David's shoulder. One day, he whispered, I'll tell you everything. About your parents, about how I found you. And about a lion, who once saved your life. David didn't speak. But in the fading light, he leaned gently into Ethan's side. And for a long moment, either of them said a word. Because sometimes, the wild doesn't just take. It gives. And on that unforgettable morning, it gave Ethan a son. And gave David a second chance at life. Not every family looks the same. Some are born of blood. Others born of courage. Of instinct. Of love. And as the stars began to appear above the quiet African plain, a ranger, a rescued lion, and a little boy became something truly rare. A family. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like. Subscribe to Furry Paws for more emotional animal stories like this one. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs a reminder that love often comes from the most unexpected places. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have done what Ethan did? Have you ever witnessed something this powerful in nature? Let us know in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care and stay kind.